Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Polly Caldwell, and I'm your host this afternoon for what is our third instalment of this Courageous Conversations webinar series. Autotrader are running this series in partnership with the UK Automotive 30% Club. In each episode, we explore a different issue related to gender diversity in the automotive industry. The aim of this webinar series is to tackle the difficult conversations, share ideas, and hear guidance on how to achieve greater diverse gender balance across the industry. Today's instalment is all about gender bias, the negative impact it has, and how we can overcome it in the automotive industry. This afternoon, I'm joined by Julia Muir, the founder of the Automotive 30% Club, Christos Saprounis, Autotrader's Head of People and Culture, Sharon Ashcroft, Trustford's HR Director, and last but by no means least, Stuart Folds, Trustford's Chairman and CEO. As ever, we want the focus to be on action and for these webinars to be as interactive as possible. Therefore, the second half of the webinar will be dedicated to answering your questions. So please do submit these now and throughout the conversation. But we wanted to start this afternoon by actually asking you a question, the results of which we will share later on. So our question for you this afternoon is, does your company face gender bias challenges? And the options we have are A, it's a serious challenge, B, it's somewhat of a challenge, and C, it's not a challenge. So hopefully you can see that poll now on your screen, and we'll leave it there whilst we get the conversation going. So as I mentioned, this afternoon, the topic is all about gender bias. So Julia, if we could come to you first, how much of an issue is gender bias in the automotive industry?
Thanks, Polly. Well, having spent months in research recently looking into gender bias in business, I can definitely conclude that it exists in all businesses where there is a gender imbalance. And obviously in UK society as a whole that leads to this. It exists in all of our heads. Men and women are biased, both biased against women. And we know this through research that shows that successful women are not as popular than men. They're not as well liked. And it exists in the form of systemic bias in cultures, structures and processes that have actually been designed to suit the male worker of the last century, not the modern male worker, as well as there being unconscious bias in the minds of recruiters and promoters. And in some cases, we've even come across there being purposeful bias against women in the form of outdated assumptions in terms of what they want for their careers and also what they're capable of. A key driver of this in many male-dominated industries, but also in automotive, is what we call the myth of meritocracy, where many companies believe themselves to be truly meritocratic. But if you don't employ women, the majority of the population, 51%, or people of colour, then you have to acknowledge that there must be some form of inbuilt, unconscious bias favouring white men. And in fact, the 2020 Parker Review actually suggested that the need to reassure people that merit won't be compromised to achieve diversity is actually what shows them that a company has an inherent bias problem, because it implies that there's a possibility that women or people of colour wouldn't get there on merit otherwise. So what I think we have, both in many male-dominated sectors, but also in automotive, is that we end up with this downward spiral of bias, where customers and the outside public perceive the fact that if women don't work there, then it can't actually be a very good environment for women to thrive in. And this then also feeds the issue of the stereotyping in the industry, that it gives us a negative image, and also that female customers may not feel comfortable purchasing a car without a male chaperone if they don't think that women would select into that environment to work. Why would they feel safe there? So it is an issue. It puts invisible barriers in the way of women that people really don't realise are there. But it's really important to remember it's not unique to automotive. This is happening in all male-dominated sectors that are bringing with them a legacy of the past, a legacy of when they were designed, when they were created and built. They were built around this profile of the majority worker at that time, whereas 21st century companies, we want 21st century automotive to attract the best talent and reflect the people that are in the workforce now. And so that's why we need to tackle this bias and accept that in most instances, it's nobody's fault that it's there. It is just something that we have to acknowledge and work to find solutions for.
So it's certainly not a simple problem to try and solve. Stuart, if we could come to you next, can you tell us what this issue means to you at Trust Ford?
Yeah, well, I think, like Julia said, there has traditionally been this bias, particularly in after sales and frontline sales toward men. And working with my HR director Sharon, I'm really quite passionate about trying to make that change and get a better split and better balance of female/male. And one of the things that we're actively doing, and I've actually taken it a little bit further now, is that all applicants for any job that come into Trust Ford, we are going to redact the gender, religion, ethnicity, to try and get a much more diverse attendee list, if you like, when it comes to interviews. Because I think in some cases there's this sort of hidden bias that people don't actually appreciate. And when you look at a CV, I think that sometimes unintentionally the interviewer could potentially be unconscious.
I think, have we lost Stuart? I think we might have done. We'll hopefully be able to hear more from Stuart shortly. Should we move on and have a little look at the results from the poll that we ran at the start of the webinar? Okay, so quite overwhelmingly there, we're certainly seeing that people do recognise it's a challenge, mainly in the serious to somewhat of a challenge. That's quite interesting. There's still a large percentage there that say it's not a challenge at all. It would be really interesting, as part of the question and answer session that we have towards the end of the webinar this afternoon, to hear some more about these sort of results. So for those of you in the audience, if you wanted to ask any questions or any sort of like talking points, if you could send those in, that would be great for us to pick up later on in the session. So whilst we're waiting for hopefully Stuart to be able to come back on, Sharon, could we hear from yourself? Can you tell us a bit more about those sort of practical steps you're taking to be able to respond from this challenge?
Of course I can. Thank you, Polly. So really just following on from what Stuart was alluding to before he's dropped off, we do have an imbalance and we're trying to break it down into 4 segments. One is looking at how we recruit and open the kind of hopper at the top, Polly, for more females to come in. So what barriers do we currently have in place that stops people from looking at automotive and specifically Trust Ford as a career choice? And some of the things we're doing around that are doing what's called speakers for schools. So we will go into schools and speak to young people, all ages, around what it's like working in automotive, to try and break down some of those perceptions of maybe they have or their parents have, and also explain to young people around you can have a real good career in automotive, and also it's a professional environment where you can earn a really, really good wage. So it's around open up the hopper at the top, reaching out to people who wouldn't have considered a career in automotive before is kind of the first point. The second point then is the interview process. And again, as Stuart just alluded to, at the minute, we kind of do recruiting on behaviours for our sales executives and our service advisors, which are predominantly the largest population roles that we have. So we recruit them psychometrically through sorry, I'm just going to have to refresh. Hopefully I'm back. Sorry, Polly.
Oh, yeah, you are. There you are, yeah.
Sorry, so that's around service advisors and sales executives where we currently recruit on behaviours, and then they go through an assessment centre, which is a panel. So there's no just one-to-one interviews, but we're going to be widening that. So we're going to be widening it so that all applications will be blind. So as Stuart was alluding to, there'll be no marital status, no name, no hobbies. We're even going to take hobbies off the application form, redact any information that would indicate whether it's a male or a female applying for that role. So there's they're the first two things. And then it's about how you induct colleagues and ensure they have a great, again, when they're coming into the industry where they have no experience, because we're recruiting on behaviours, we need to ensure that when we're inducting them, we give them all the information and knowledge that they need to be able to then come in and do a great job. And also then the final bit is how do we retain the talent and how do we grow those individuals and pull those females through into more senior roles. It's kind of the four areas that I would split it down into.
I'm sorry, I got logged off there, so I apologise, I'm back on now.
Thank you, Stuart. So that sounds really interesting, Sharon. It sounds like you're really covering the whole journey there, sort of from intake right up through to your retention as well. So that's a really thorough sort of approach. That sounds really interesting. Stuart, sorry, it was glad to have you back. Would you like to continue to elaborate on your point? So, sorry, the question was, what does this challenge sort of mean to you at Trust Board?
Well, I think what we're definitely trying to do now is to try and get that gender split better. And there are a number of ways of doing that. I think Sharon's probably alluded to while I went offline by redacting all the information on job applications so that we can make sure that we're not unintentionally being biased when it comes to doing an interview. And I think one of the other things that we were about to launch that got sort of caught up in the COVID issue was a graduate programme. And having had experience of that over many years, it's a great way of getting a good mix of interviewees to come toward joining the company as a graduate. And in my experience, then you do get a really good mix of both male and female applicants. And that again allows you to bring on board a better split, and it allows them also to progress through an experience in all aspects of the business and take them into a management position. And some of the best general managers I've had in the past and sales managers have come through that programme, and the gender split has been pretty equal. So that's something that we, as I say, we're going to launch, but we put it on hold because of COVID, but we'll probably relaunch next year. And I think the interesting thing as well is we've just opened a smart hub, which is a sort of retail environment in a shopping centre up in Castleford. And again, the applicants that came through for that was again a good mix of both male and female. And I think potentially one of the reasons for that is because I think the way we described the role was more of a sort of high street model. So more of somebody that's going to show the vehicle, not necessarily have all the technical skills, because that's not what that job's all about. The job is all about showing the car and or commercial vehicle in a retail environment where the mix of male and female is pretty even. So it's something that we're pretty passionate about. And interestingly, a third of our board and leadership team are now females, which is good. And our head of finance is a female, our marketing director is a female, Sharon, our HR director is female, head of another part of the HR department, female. So we have got quite a lot. It's probably more to do with how you attract females to come into things like car sales and potentially the after-sales side of the business, that's a little bit more of a challenge. But we're really passionate about trying to use this new way of recruiting by taking all that potential gender bias information off the job application, so that when people turn up to have an interview, that we've not, as I said, unintentionally left some bias. And we want to be an employer of choice. We're now in our 5th year of being in the best big companies to work for through Sunday Times, and that's something that, again, we get a lot of votes from our own people, and it's something that we want to keep promoting. It's a great accolade to have that, and as I say, we want to try and be an employer of choice, and doing some of this stuff and trying to get that mix better, I think will go a long way towards helping, and not just helping the business, but I think it will help our profitability as well.
So that's a really interesting approach you're taking there with the, you're saying about the shopping centres and sort of like a new sort of way of sort of describing the role. That's a really interesting approach, and hopefully it sounds like it's going to be quite successful for you. And massive congratulations as well with the 3rd of your senior leadership team who are women, and also the Times list there. That's all really great stuff. I think the graduate programme that you mentioned is something that Autotrader, we have quite a lot of experience of success with our graduate programme. So that feels like a good time to bring Christos into the conversation. Christos, could you tell us a bit about Autotrader's journey on addressing the challenge of gender bias in the automotive industry?
Sure, and hello everybody. So for Autotrader, first of all, something to add on all the excellent points that everyone has been making is that gender bias is something that impacts both women and men. It might be impacting them in a different way, but it's useful to remind ourselves that negative stereotypes towards men and towards women will impact everyone. Because it's important to realize that this is something that everyone needs to be involved in solving, because it can have a negative impact on everyone. Saying that, it's definitely disproportionately impacting women when it comes to the automotive industry, and for Autotrader, the technology industry, because we sit between the two industries. And what we've noticed, especially as we moved away from being a print business and a magazine to being a technology business, is that our employee makeup really shifted, and we realized about 6 years ago that our representation of women in the business was very low, just above 30%. So we decided that this is a very important issue, a big challenge for us that we needed to change. And the way we tackled it is, first of all, by acknowledging the problem and then educating our colleagues, raising the awareness across our colleagues with a lot of honest conversations, a lot of workshops, a lot of events like this one that we're hosting today, in order to make sure that everyone is aware of the problem and have that openness in tackling it. And then we also took practical steps when it comes to our processes and our recruitment processes to make sure that, first of all, we're attractive to women. We break down those stereotypes, thinking that Autotrader would be more a male-dominated environment. And it's reaching out and collaborating with organizations like Auto 30% and going, like Sharon described, going all the way to schools, a lot sooner than actually women are of working age, because they, in those formative years, they make some decisions that will impact the careers that they make in the future. So it's important for our women and our men to go out there and showcase our industry, and about having real models, people that they can relate to, and they can understand why a career in automotive would be a great career for them and what it can offer them and how exciting it can be, especially as the industry is changing and evolving. There's a lot of exciting opportunities. So I think it's very important to make sure that you build that a brand for automotive, so that people know that it's welcoming and women know that it's welcoming for them. And then making sure that throughout your processes, you educate your colleagues, You involve a variety of colleagues in making decisions, whether that's recruitment, whether that's promotion, or whether that is who do you involve in a project. Make sure that you're always open to getting loads of different people. Our graduate programs, our apprenticeship programs, and also more recently our returners programs have been very beneficial. And I think having that rounded approach and taking that approach that this is not something we are going to solve overnight. For us, we've been deliberately driving that strategy for the past 6 years. And the results that we're seeing is that now we've got a board that's 50-50 when it comes to men and women. And we've managed to move from that low 30s to having 40% of our business being women. But it's not only about the numbers, although representation is very important, but it's also about the experience that our people have working for us. So it's making sure that you constantly monitor that experience across all the different stages of employee life cycle, being very open to receive that feedback, giving the chance for people to give feedback in many different ways, whether that's anonymous or where it's open, and making sure that you act on that feedback. You really listen to your people, and that's, as simple as that sounds, listening to your people will help you identify what their problems, and then involving everyone to creating solutions together. This is not something that HR can solve in isolation, or this is not just for the senior leadership team. This is for the whole business to get involved and come up with solutions.
Thanks for that, Christos. It sounds like Autotrade have been on a real sort of journey. If you can cast your mind back, what do you think are one of the sort of the first steps that Autotrader took on this journey? Our listeners would like to talk about the action that they can take. What action points do you think those at the beginning of their journey can really begin to take?
I think one really important thing is just opening that conversation and making sure that there is that common understanding of across the business, and also listening to people, because people will have different views on this. And when we're talking about biases and stereotypes, I think we need to all acknowledge that people will have different views, and we need to allow people to bring those views to the open and have really honest discussions. So I think a practical step that I think everyone can really implement is build a network of employees. For us, we build the women's network, and making sure that the network is a forum for everyone to have those open discussions. And then it's also a group of people, both men and women, that want to make a difference when it comes to gender balance, and giving them the tools and allowing them the time. It doesn't really take, you don't really need to do big initiatives with big budgets. It's really allowing people the time to get together, have honest conversations, come up with solutions, and then the business needs to support them, stay very close to them so that they can actually work with their HR teams, with the senior leadership teams in order to make those changes. So I would encourage everyone to do that, to get your employees to actually drive that change that you want to see in the business.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Christos. So we're almost ready to move on to the Q&A section of the webinar, but there is still time for those watching to submit questions, so please do go ahead and do that. But before we get to that bit, I have one final question for the panel. The series is very much focused on providing those practical tips, the guidance for every organisation, regardless of where they are on their journey. So with that in mind, the final question today is, what steps can businesses take to improve the gender bias within the automotive industry? Julia, should we come to you first?
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, well, I would say the starting point for everybody is really to fully embrace the concept and for it to be driven from the very top. So, it's brilliant that Stuart is on the call today and clearly is doing this. But it's about understanding that being inclusive is the way to tackle avoiding exclusion. So once you have it as the mindset that we are trying to include women, we are trying to include people of colour, because we know it makes business sense to do that. We know that that will lead us to be more profitable. What it then leads you to do is to examine if or where you are excluding people accidentally. And so that really is the key mindset change to embrace. Then in terms of tips, so it's brilliant to hear that both Auto Trader and Trustford are doing quite a lot of this, but I'm going to just kind of summarise it. So the first thing is really, when you're recruiting, make sure that you're speaking the right language out there that isn't excluding women. We know that research from the jobs boards like Adzuna, we feel that about 60% of businesses tend to use male gendered language in their job adverts. And so just getting a bit more advice and guidance on how to neutralise the language in job adverts can lead to a significant improvement. Plus, make sure that when you're portraying the business out there, that the images you're using are diverse and show a nice kind of variety of workers. Also, this is an opportunity with graduates is to hire in group cohorts, because we know that when you hire in cohorts, recruiters actually then compare across the cohort better and are less likely to recruit against a traditional stereotype from the past. They're comparing against the group itself to find the best. Another one is advice is be careful with cultural fit. So do examine the leadership characteristics you recruit against, the person you recruit against, to make sure that they aren't built around a historic high performer from the past, which would probably have been a white man, and to make sure that there's nothing in there that actually would exclude other profiles of people naturally manifesting those traits. So it's really important to make sure that the profiles you're recruiting against, in order to get this cultural fit that you look for, hasn't got any hidden inherent bias within it. Another tip is to scrutinise your selection data. So when you are recruiting, make sure that there isn't a point in the process where suddenly all the women or all the people of colour drop out. Because if that's the case, something at that point in the process has probably given an advantage to other people and a disadvantage to them. It's great to hear about Trustford being blind to gender and diversity cues, because removing all of those off applications, because we know that no matter with the best will in the world, if your recruiters might truly believe that they have no bias, we can't help the fact that we all do have inherent prejudices and biases, and it's about removing the possibility of those getting in the way. One of my favourites, and because I think we fall very foul of this in the sector, is don't confuse experience with expertise. And a great source of expertise are women returners that Auto Trader, I know, have a programme to tap into. The issue with experience versus expertise is sometimes if we're lazy and we just put must have 5 years experience in this, it will cut out a lot of women who are perfectly capable and just as good, but have only got 18 months experience. And because research shows that women are less likely to apply for a job if they don't meet 100%, whereas men will tend to apply when they only meet about 60%, you tend to cut out the women that would have been perfect for that role simply because you're asking for this standard number of years experience. And finally, I would say promote proportionately. So looking at your data again, if you are hiring in at the junior levels, a fairly good balance across across both genders. But then at the next level up, suddenly it's mainly men. And then at the next level up, there's even fewer women. There's something there that's holding back the women, or there's some kind of invisible barrier, or there's some kind of bias in the process. So you must always look to aim to say, well, the standard is that obviously we should be promoting proportionately because we're hiring in people through the same standards, and they should be irrespective of their gender. So if they're not progressing up proportionally, there's an issue there. And so what is that? So just in summary, data is absolutely essential. Monitor what you're doing, but the driver of it all is really the desire and the energy that goes behind deciding that we do need to do something about this, and it needs to be driven from the top.
That's great. Thank you, Julia. I think, yeah, data is so powerful, isn't it? And it can really be used to shine a light on some of these issues. I think the graduate, the cohort thing that you mentioned, for me personally, that resonates quite a lot, actually, because many moons ago when I joined Autotrader on the graduate programme, the cohort that I came on board with were a real support network. And I think if you're going into a male-dominated work and place, that cohort that hopefully has got good representation, that can be a real sort of support system. So yeah, I like that a lot. Stuart, Sharon, did you have any sort of tips or guidance that you'd like to add from a forward perspective?
Polly, I'll probably just go in.
I think we're going to try and eke out is ambition within even the team that we have today. And Julia, Sharon and I are going to set up a forum with all of our women managers to really sort of start off a group to see what it is that they need for them to climb the ladder. And one of the things that we're looking to do is where we have, and there's a good example, for example, in Manchester, where one of our service managers is a girl. She's a really capable manager, and I'd be really interested to see what her own career requirement stroke path is. And one of the things that we're going to do is to offer up a buddying scheme. So in that particular example, buddy her up with her general manager so that potentially when he's off on holiday, she can take the helm and try and promote again from within. And look at the female team that we have, and speak to them directly. And that's something we're going to do very, very quickly, just to establish what is it, what's the thing that hinders them from applying for a bigger job when one comes up, and how do we get that wider experience across so that we can start to have a better mix, particularly in our management side. Because when you look at the business today, we don't have any issue in terms of recruiting women in sales administration, in finance departments, a lot of the back house activities. It's the frontline ones that seem to be a bit more of a challenge. And I think, as I talked about our Smart Hub in Castleford, the applicants that came in from there was a pretty good mix of both male and female. And I think that it was because it appears to be more of a retail high street environment than perhaps walking into a great big car dealership. So, and I think the redacting of all the information on the CVs, to me, is going to be a real eye-opener, I think, by taking all of that information off so that anybody reading a CV will have no idea whether the person is male, female, Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, or whatever. It's absolutely interview them on the merits of their CV. And going back to the point that Julia made about experience, unless you're talking about a technician, for example, I'm actually much more prefer to not employ people with experience, if I'm being brutally honest, because if they're coming from another car dealership, I don't particularly want their bad habits come into Trustboard. We run our business in a very unique way. And I would far rather train people from the ground up than bring people in that have perhaps worked in the industry elsewhere. So that would be my tip.
No, that's great, thank you. And Sharon, finally, do you have anything to add before we get into those questions?
Yeah, I guess for me, Polly, it's around what's great now. It's on Stuart's agenda. Not that it's not been on his kind of pad to do before, but it's at the top of his agenda now. So as Julia alluded to earlier, you know, I've been doing what I can from an HR point of view, and I've had great support, which I do need to call out, from Julia Greenoff, who's our marketing director. But it's now top of Stuart's pad because he sees the business benefits of having a more balanced workforce, and that actually drives profitability. So it's great that we've got that support. And it's great listening to Christos, you know, talking about in the women's networking group. My call out would be, I don't think Trustford needs to reinvent the wheel. We're still at the very start of this journey, but listening to what some great organisations have done, we just kind of need to pinch their ideas and get on and get it done and win hearts and minds and educate everyone else in the business around why we're doing this. So that kind of would be my outtake on it all.
I think you're exactly right. There's so much stuff out there, isn't it? And there's so many different companies that I'm sure you can work with to, like you say, steal their ideas. So yeah, it's not reinventing the wheel sometimes, is it? It's just about taking the best of what's available. So thank you all so much. That's been a great conversation, and we've had quite a few different questions come in. So I'll just jump straight in. So Christos, this probably feels like a good one for yourself. So it's clear we have a gender issue in our business, but it doesn't feel like it's being taken seriously by our management team. How do you think I can broach it with my manager? What would be the best route? So that's come in anonymously.
I think is the best approach is always to have honest conversations. And then when you're having conversations with people that you feel might not necessarily be on board on this agenda, I think a very good thing to do is listen. So I think pose the challenge and ask them the question about their feelings around this, their thoughts around this, and really listen to them so that you can understand their point of view. And it's only then that you're able to, put your argument across, potentially change that perception. But I think from listening, I think it's a very good approach because we need to realize that everyone's going to be on a very different path and a different stage in their journey about this. And we cannot expect everyone to have the same level of awareness or interest when it comes to this for many reasons, maybe because of what they've been exposed to in the past. Maybe it's something that they feel that doesn't actually impact them personally, or in some cases because they benefit from the current system, they benefit from the current situation. So in order to make a change, in my experience, I think you should, yes, be challenging, but at the same time, also make sure that you listen. And I think you'll be able to understand their point of view. And if it comes to changing their hearts and their minds, you'll be able to do that a lot more effectively when you know exactly where they're coming from. And the last thing I would say about that is that try to find some common ground. It's what I alluded to before. When we're talking about gender bias, there's lots of gender stereotypes that are impacting men. There's a lot of stereotypes about men and expressing their feelings openly that's having a major impact on their mental health. Now, challenges that men and women face can be different, but they can also be very similar. So by finding that common ground, you'll be able to establish that there's something in it for everyone. And I think that can be a very good tactic to bring people closer together without, though, them moving away from the fact that challenges that women face are very specific in our industry and in society. Don't move away from that, but try to bring actually people more closer together, have a common understanding, and at the same time challenge each other.
Thanks for that, Christos. Just within that answer, you've touched on another question that we've had through actually from Rebecca on the webinar. So how do we get everyone to actually action helping? So especially if they are cis white men, for instance, who are currently benefiting from the system.
Yes, I think it's a really good question, which I think I alluded to, that there are people that might be benefiting from the system and therefore they do not necessarily are that keen for that system to change. And we need to acknowledge that. So I think to bring them on board, it can be something that's very personal. So, having a solution that is going to actually apply to everyone is very difficult. And that's what makes this issue so nuanced, so complex. So I think I'll go back to what I said. Make sure that you're very open to listening. Make sure that you develop that relationship with those people of trust. I think be very careful not to be, when you're addressing those issues, not to attack people. Don't start conversations by blaming people that what they are doing is not enough or that they're doing the wrong thing. But make sure that you bring people into the conversation by listening to them and then developing that relationship of trust so that you can also challenge them. And I think it's also highlighting the fact that, although something might not be impacting you personally, it will be impacting people that are close to you. It will be, if you're a man, it might be impacting your partner, it might be impacting your daughter, it might be impacting your sister, your friend. So try to make it personal so that they can understand that it's something that is impacting them. And also from a business perspective, which I think we covered a lot, make sure that they understand the impact that it has on the business. When you're not representing your customers, you're not going to come up with the best ways to serve your customers. You're not going to be coming up with the best products for your customers. So it's very important for you to have this understanding of the needs and the challenges that everyone faces from your customer base. So it could be something very personal. It could be something that affects your team, on your environment, and something that affects your business. So creating that understanding and allowing them that space to think about all that will hopefully change their hearts and minds and will give them the opportunity to actually act on it. So first change their hearts and minds and then ask them to act, and then give them the opportunity, all these initiatives. We talk about buddies, we talk about mentors, we could talk about sponsors. As a business, have those opportunities ready. So when you've changed their hearts and minds, then they're able to channel that through acting using all those different initiatives.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. We've got another question here that's coming from David. Trust Ford has developed many senior management positions over the years. Is this all about the culture of a business and focus and attention placed on equality and diversity from the top down? And he also adds, well done, Sharon, on continuing to care and develop your process. So yes, Stuart or Sharon, would you like to answer that one? So yeah, how much of it is about the culture of your business?
I think quite a lot of it's about the culture. And as I said earlier on, we have, we don't have as much as we would like, but we're certainly well on the journey to getting a better gender split. And as I said, it's our plan to very soon have a forum with our women managers in the business, of which we've got quite a lot. We've got our national fleet manager as a girl, marketing girls, the team in marketing are largely female, and that's not because it's a female environment, it's because we pick the best people for the job. And I think that's, the thing for me is, it's not experience, it's having the ability to see the talent in someone and bring them on board and then train them and give them all the help and expertise that we can give to make them settle in to do a good job and have a good career. So yeah, I mean, it's a culture that we're trying to ingrain within the business, and we're on the journey. We're certainly nowhere near finished, but I'm determined that we will get this balance much better in as many parts of the business as we can. I don't think that we're ever going to have 50% of our technicians as females. I just don't see that, because it's not something that I think is particularly attractive as a job. But from a sales point of view, there's absolutely no reason. And from a management point of view, you know, I'm a big believer that we should have a much better gender balance in our management. And you know, I would like to see some of the dealerships being run by women.
Polly, if I can just carry on from that. So we have value. Hi, sorry, Polly, Sharon. If I can just continue from that in terms of the culture, you know, we have a strong set of values within Trust Ford around honesty and integrity, care, which I alluded to earlier. We recruit against. So those values are now in our DNA, and it's around explaining to people that this is how we do things around here. So I think if you don't have a strong culture in any organisation, you can't carry on this kind of route to address the gender imbalance, because you need to have a good set of foundations before you start building any wall. And I think we do have a real good culture, which means that we can now start building these walls.
I really like that. So what was that? So you have to have good foundations before you can start building some walls. That's I'll take that one away for sure. Thank you, Sharon. So we have a question come in for Julia now. So do you think the industry is taking the issue of gender bias and gender diversity seriously enough? With the sector evolving so quickly, digital retailing for one, would you agree we'd be at a disadvantage by limiting our talent pool?
Yes, is the simple answer. Yeah, what we have to see is this is the opportunity, isn't it? This is the change that's taking place. So we're undergoing some quite stressful change. I think everyone will agree, due to various reasons. But a positive change is the adoption of technology, the digitalization of the sector, that enables us to actually rethink again our structures, our job descriptions, our job designs, and to therefore potentially attract a much more diverse variety of employees into the organisations. I think also what it brings with it is the opportunity to start to crash through some of the barriers that have perhaps been in place in the past. So things like remote working and flexible working, that digitalisation and the adoption of technology enables, I think in the past was really kind of seen as frowned upon, and that by choosing to work remotely or flexibly, you're a bit of an anomaly to the norm. And now I think the norm has probably shifted to make it more that it is now acceptable that a key player in the team might not be working the 8 at the desk on the site or in the office, that they are actually balancing their time. And probably, well, as we know, there's lots of evidence that shows that we can be far more productive when we aren't subject to presenteeism. And just being physically present means that you are viewed as being a good performer, when actually we need to shift it more towards outputs. And just again, one of the benefits of technology is that we can actually start to measure our workers' productivity better now. We've not really done that very well in our sector. It's heavily controlled in the workshops. Everybody knows what their efficiency rates are in the workshops, but not really in any other part of the business. And I think by doing that, we will start to will attract more women, because it's a way of measuring somebody's performance that's a very objective way and not subjective. And also we will start to remove, I hope, some of the mediocre people that perhaps are blocking roles, that are just, every leader of the sector talks to me and so they acknowledge that there are certain people in the business that perhaps wouldn't have been there if they had got a more diverse variety of people applying for the role. And so, this is one of the issues that could well be tackled through being able to measure productivity more effectively. But I also, if I just may respond to one of the previous questions as well, which I think is an absolute critical point to address, and that is, what do we do about the people that are perhaps have been benefiting from this inherent bias, and how do we still include them? You know, we absolutely don't want to exclude the white man, shall we say, that has probably benefited from inherent bias in the past. They also have to understand that they are part of diversity. You know, they are part of the variety that is needed to make the industry successful. And we have to build in an understanding that it's not a competition between men and women. It's a collaboration. And it's a collaboration that brings together complementary characteristics, that says both men and women are needed, and we need to tap into the skills of both. So it's so important that we take, that there is a safe space, that people are able to express if they are feeling, that things aren't moving for them now because they're moving for a different profile of person. And we need to make sure that we can overcome any kind of issues with this by having processes in place, such as Stuart touched upon, about really understanding people's plans for the future, what their personal career plans are through things like personnel development committees or sponsorships, so that there is no sense of, I thought that was going to be my job and she took it from me. It's always, we can never have people assuming that they have a career path in front of them, that other people are there to potentially compete and take it away from them. It has to be seen as a team approach, and that collaborating together will lead to better business performance, and everybody has a role to play in that.
Thank you for that, Julia. We've got a question now for Sharon. At what point did you realise there was an issue with gender bias, and what steps did you take?
When I started measuring it. So I think it goes back to what Julia said earlier. You kind of think, you look around and you kind of think, oh, actually, there's more men than there is females. And it's only then when you start to look at the data, you think, wow, actually, it's a real disproportionate. And some of the actions that we then had to take were built from looking at the data, and also really educating myself around what difference would it make to the organisation if we had a better gender balance. So looking into the business case, then looking back at the data and going, okay, it all makes sense. So I would say, look at your data. Your data will tell a story.
Yeah, data again, obviously so important. Can you share with us a few of the sort of data points that you found particularly useful? Is it just your overall gender split, or are there other things that you're looking at?
No, so we produce on a monthly basis what our female gender split is, but I now measure in most things, even when we do a restructuring program. So even when we make redundancies, I actually measure in terms of how many females percentage made redundant compared to males percentage redundant. I look at people who are being promoted. So what percentage are we promoting males to females? So actually, the more data you get, the better the story is. And you can also kind of think, okay, well, we're not being, making all the females redundant because it's a kind of a relative split. So they're the kind of higher level things. I measure turnover, males and females, forced leavers, males, females. So practically everything where there's a kind of HR measure, I try to split out in male and female as well. So I can see the whole story, not just an overall data figure.
That's really interesting. It sounds like that's been really insightful for you at Trust Ford. We've not got that long left. I think we may have got time for one final question. So Stuart, this one is for yourself. Julia mentioned earlier on that change needs to come from the top. As CEO, what role do you think you and your counterparts need to play in driving gender diversity, not just in your business, but across the industry?
It's a difficult one, but I think ambition is one of the questions that we're going to ask when we have forum with our female management teams. I think that, you know, when you go to, if you go back to the traditional way, guy joins the business as a car salesman, gets promoted to a business manager, gets promoted to a sales manager, and potentially eventually ends up as a general manager. That tends to be the route that the path goes. But I'm not quite sure, and it'll be a really interesting discussion when we have this forum, to sort of ask these guys, what is it that you have in terms of your career ambition? Because I want to actively encourage people to put their hand up when a job becomes available, and I think that is the same out in our industry. It's what is your ambition? It should not be, as it is in many cases, a male-dominated world. There has to be a better split.
Yes, thank you for that. We do still have a few more minutes, so let's see what else we've got. Yes, so there's another anonymous question coming here. So perhaps Julia or Christos, this might be best for yourselves. So we know we have a diversity problem, but our HR team is quite small and we don't really have much experience in this area, so it feels quite daunting. Can you recommend any external support that would be available to us?
Well, what I would say is join the 30% Club, or get your organisation to join Automotive 30% Club, because what we're all about is a network. It's a support network across the sector that's trying to help everybody create a plan to improve their gender balance. And we have lots of materials, reports, and helpful people that can talk to your HR managers or yourselves about what actions take. So there's absolutely a movement of over 40 members of the Automotive 30% Club who are all trying to collaborative way and share best practice to achieve these goals that are so important for the whole sector. But there are also external advisors. There's free resources in terms of HR resources out there, such as CIPD. But there are many consultants and advisors as well. But my recommendation on that is to talk to other companies and ask them who they've used to see who really seems to be providing the best solutions.
Yes, that really goes back to what we were saying before, doesn't it? Like, work with your counterparts, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can sort of share ideas amongst yourselves, can't you? So that's pretty much us out of time. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panel members today. It's been a great conversation, and thank you so much for attending and for sharing your insights. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time on what will be our fourth webinar. So thank you very much.